Space flight is complicated, even when you're one of the most famous space explorations and aerospace companies on the planet at the moment. Space weather is unpredictable at best and downright turbulent at worst, and that's exactly why 40 out of the newly launched 49 of SpaceX's satellites are currently in deep, deep trouble. Here's everything you need to know about the solar storm that knocked out 40 newly launched satellites from Elon Musk's latest SpaceX flight. First up, the beginning. About 40 of SpaceX's Starlink satellites fell out of orbit earlier in February due to terrible space weather. In fact, the company had launched the satellites directly into a solar storm. On February 3rd, a batch of 49 satellites were sent of SpaceX's latest launch at the time. Have you been living under a rock the past couple of years, or just generally don't care about space news? These satellites were part of an ongoing mission of sorts. The 49 satellites were supposed to join the other 2,000 satellites, give or take, that the company has launched already in order to amplify its global space-based internet business drastically. The mission is honorable in nature and the first of its kind, as it hopes to provide high-speed internet access to people all across the world, even those who live in the most remote areas. And 2,000 satellites may seem like a lot to send flying into space for this great venture, but in reality, SpaceX would need to deploy close to 42,000 satellites that all would need to work in collective cohesion in order to deliver high-speed, uninterrupted service. As of January 2022, the service had about 145,000 users across 25 countries, but the goal was hindered by the solar storm, and that has people wondering, how did the company not see it coming? What exactly happened? The space weather event that the satellites managed to hit is known as a geomagnetic storm. The event occurs when streams of charged particles, or solar winds, that are emitted from the sun directly interact with Earth's magnetic field. The energized particles then manage to heat the upper atmosphere up and cause it to thicken up. And, side note, yes, there's atmosphere outside of Earth and space. This is because it fades out over thousands of miles. So what happened, to be exact? There was this solar storm that kind of impacted the entire area of the orbit where the Starlink satellites were launched and deployed. The storm then made the atmosphere there dense enough that 40 out of the 49 satellites were not able to make their way up to their intended orbit. Did they do no weather checks? It is unclear whether SpaceX evaluated the weather in space at all before the launch, and when asked for a comment on the incident, the company did not respond. No one really knows the financial impact that this solar storm fiasco will bring to SpaceX. As of yet, the company has not revealed the precise amount it cost them to create a single Starlink satellite. Gwen Shotwell, president of the company, did say that it takes well below $1 million a satellite way back in 2019. In the past, when it comes to rocket launches under the threat of a space storm of some kind, the project is pulled back and delayed until the bad weather passes. The program coordinator at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Space Weather Prediction Center, Bill Murtaugh, claimed that that should be the case, especially because launch officials routinely keep a close eye on space weather before rockets even take off. He did concede by saying that each company has its own specific criteria for dealing with such an event and deciding whether or not a space weather event will impact its launch at all. It's difficult to predict these storms. In a turn of events, though, James Spann, head of space weather within NASA's division that studies the sun, did say that it can be hard to predict exactly how a geomagnetic storm of the magnitude might have affected or impacted Starlink and its satellites. So, as a justification for SpaceX's launch and deployment, he said that because the storm wasn't that severe in magnitude, SpaceX would have had no reason to presume that it would have an impact on the launch at all. Is there a silver lining? Even despite these claims, anyone would guess that the loss of 40 whole satellites isn't exactly ideal for the company and its finances, or the Starlink Internet project. James Spann did talk about how the data gathered on this storm by NASA and the NOAA's observations about how the Starlink satellites reacted to the storm will help improve space weather modeling in the future. He told CNN that it was one silver lining. He said that they are going to use the data points to ensure that, in the future, the chances of success are even better than they already are now. Next, what SpaceX did during the storm. According to data from the Starlink satellites, apparently, the escalation speed and severity of the storm caused atmospheric drag to increase up to 50% higher than during previous launches. This data was provided by SpaceX in the form of an update on its website. It said that during the storm, the Starlink team commanded the satellites into a safe mode where they could then fly edge-on, like a sheet of paper, to minimize drag. This was so they could effectively take cover from the storm. They had to put on the safe mode in the first place because the added drag from the storm actually prevented the satellites from turning off the safe mode. It was then revealed in the same SpaceX post that up to 40 satellites will re-enter or have already re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at the time the update was posted. Now, let's look into the damage. In the same update, the company noted that the satellites that didn't manage to make it to their orbit did not pose any threat or risk to pre-existing satellites satellites in orbit on their way back to Earth. The update also said that on their descent, the satellites should disintegrate fairly conveniently as they slam into the thickest part of the Earth's atmosphere. This is so that they don't threaten any people or property on the ground. The company revealed that all these safety measures are in fact designed and built into their crafts. SpaceX has said in the past that it intentionally deploys its Starlink satellites at a considerably lower altitude than their intended orbit, and this is in case one satellite malfunctions. In that scenario, it would not just be left to fly uncontrolled through orbit for very long, which will also help mitigate debris from space. Next, a conflicting opinion. But an opposite view could be that had SpaceX not intentionally deployed their Starlink satellites at such a low altitude, it would not be this badly affected by the geomagnetic storm in the very first place. And on that note, in a new filing with the Federal Communications Commission, which approves all satellite launches, NASA raised certain concerns regarding the sheer number of satellites that SpaceX has deployed. According to NASA, the overwhelming amount of satellites launched by SpaceX could perhaps become a problem and pose a threat to the International Space Station and other important assets in space. Now, let's talk about space weather. Every 10 years or so, the sun completes a solar cycle of calm and turbulent weather activity, then begins another. Eruptions like solar flares and coronal mass ejection events, which is when the sun's outermost atmosphere spits out plasma and magnetic fields, can affect power grids, satellites, GPS, airlines, rockets, and even astronauts in space. The disruptions caused by space weather affect the Earth and its communication systems by affecting radio frequencies. Currently, we're in the calm phase of our current 25th solar cycle, with the intensity expected to hit us around 2025. An example of space weather acting up is the Northern Lights. Murtaugh explained that a beautiful, visible manifestation of space weather is the Northern Lights that everyone loves. He called it the nice, pretty part. Then said that the consequences, as they found out due to SpaceX, can be quite significant to some of these technologies. So, what now? Well, SpaceX just sent more satellites up there. On February 21st, 2022, SpaceX launched another set of Starlink satellites after more than two-thirds of their last batch were destroyed by the solar storm. A Falcon 9 lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida at 9:44 a.m. This was after a one-day delay because of recovery weather. The Falcon 9 upper stage managed to deploy about 46 satellites only 62 minutes after takeoff, and 20 minutes after that, official confirmation was received by the ground station. The rocket's first stage completed its 11th flight as it landed on a drone ship near the Bahamas. The stage had previously launched the Demo 2 commercial crew mission, the CRS-21 cargo mission, the Anasis 2 satellite, 2 transporter rideshare missions, and 5 Starlink missions. In SpaceX history, the booster is the second to completely perform 11 whole launches. With this new mission, SpaceX took a slightly different approach as they conducted a second burn to place the satellites into a near circular orbit at an altitude of about 330 kilometers. This, compared to the last deployment, which placed satellites into orbit with a perigee of 210 kilometers, actually helps reduce the atmospheric drag, but also explains why this launch carried 3 fewer satellites than previous recent missions. And that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.